Sir Jackie, what was your take on that Vettel-Hamilton incident?
There is no doubt, in my opinion, that Vettel was completely wrong, irresponsible, in colliding with Lewis. Whether that was a moment of anger or whatever it may have been, it still was not correct. However, there's another side to that which I think is more important. The reason that it happened was that Lewis either lifted off completely from the gas pedal or brushed the brakes at a time when no racing driver behind the leading driver would have expected anybody to do that at that time. And therefore, Vettel, even with the fast reactions of a Formula One world champion of 4 times, still ran into the back of Lewis, not by any intention at all, but by the fact that it was such a severe retard, while he, Vettel, and every other driver for that matter were ready to accelerate down the straight because the pace car had already kind of almost disappeared. That provoked, there's no doubt, Vettel's frame of mind, and the mind management wasn't working. As it developed, then, in my opinion, Sebastian Vettel was absolutely wrong to collide with Lewis Hamilton, and I think that was a large mistake.
In your career, were you ever exposed to that sort of road rage? What about Clay Regazzoni at the Nürburgring in '72?
Pretty close. What he did to me in the Nürburgring never occurred either before or after that incident in my entire career. And he absolutely took me off the road and into a double Armco barrier. I went to the stewards, I went to the tower, I spoke to Prince Metternich, but there was no communication from the marshal's post. There wasn't any form of communication. It wasn't there. It wasn't as if nobody was looking or nobody was listening. There was no way for them to talk back to the tower, apparently. And they came back to me and said, "I'm sorry, we can't take any action because there was no ability to communicate any observations."
What did you think about the penalty Vettel was given and the system now for deciding matters like this?
Well, that's a different issue. And I would observe in the following way. Currently, the manner in which the FIA approach this, in my opinion, is dated and no longer valid. At Indianapolis or IndyCar racing, there is one man, and it was Johnny Rutherford, who was the man in charge of making decisions about questionable moves, collisions, or situations on the track. He was of considerable authority, considerable experience and knowledge. His integrity was never questioned, and he never made any decisions that were controversial. The way the FIA currently do it, as I understand, is that they've got 4 stewards at each meeting, if I'm right. Of those 4, one is a driver. The other 3 stewards very seldom are the same ones from racetrack to racetrack to racetrack. Now, I think, first of all, there's room for speculation if you've got that number of people, because if there's 3 FIA people who have either been given the wink to do one thing or the other, there's only one driver. So therefore, if you had, and they would have to be paid a correct amount of money for a retired racing driver, it could be Zanardi, for example. If you took somebody of that calibre, as was Johnny Rutherford, then you would have somebody with intimate knowledge from race to race to race to race, and you would have continuity of judgment. But they would have to be paid, and the FIA would say, we can't afford to do that. The money in Formula One, I don't know where it all goes, but to turn around and say we can't afford to pay somebody in a sport that is, to say the least, capital intensive, is, in my opinion, an excuse that I can't accept. And if I were president of the FIA tomorrow, that's one of the first things I would do.
It's a shame that all of this coloured the day in Baku, because the really happy news was that Daniel Ricciardo won for Red Bull Racing. Max Verstappen was also very quick and probably would have finished first had his power unit not lost oil pressure. Many others indeed could have won. Lewis, of course, Vettel if he hadn't been so petulant, Kimi if he hadn't first been hit by Bottas and then punctured a tyre on debris, and Sahara Force India, who had both cars ahead of the eventual podium finishers before their drivers ran into one another. Anyway, getting back to Daniel, it didn't look to be a great weekend for him, even as the race approached half distance. As in Melbourne, he dropped it in qualifying and he stopped early in the race to remove debris from the inlet ducts. However, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant at the restarts on cold tyres, making the two Williams drivers look a little bit ordinary into turn one, and he was a model of rhythm and control in the closing laps with victory in sight.